number that shouts from heaven. Have you ever wondered why the number 40 keeps echoing through the Bible over and over again? It rained for 40 days when the flood covered the earth. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, surrounded by fire and cloud. Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. And Jesus, he fasted for 40 days before facing the devil himself. This is not a coincidence. The number 40 is a signal, a code from heaven. Every time it appears, it means something is ending or something is about to begin. But in between, there is testing, stripping, silence, pressure. It is the number of divine transition where God watches closely and the enemy attacks fiercely. Most people ignore it. They dismiss the struggle as random, the silence as punishment. But if you felt like you're in a holding pattern, if your spirit has been restless, stretched, refined, you may be in your 40 right now. And if you are, you need to hear this. Comment below. I'm in my 40s. Subscribe to Sacred Light Powerful Words, because this isn't just a number, it's a warning. And what comes next will shake everything. 40 is the number of divine cleansing. It always begins with a stripping, not of what is evil, but of what is excess. When God brings someone into a 40, He doesn't just remove sin, He removes comfort, distraction, dependency, anything that competes with His voice. It doesn't look like fire at first, it looks like inconvenience. A relationship falters, a door closes, your routine breaks. The things that once gave you peace no longer satisfy. What once felt stable now feels strange. You try to pray the disruption away, but heaven stays silent. Why? Because you're not being attacked. You're being cleansed. The number 40 always starts with a washing, a divine detox of the spirit. Just like rain fell for 40 days in Noah's time to cleanse the earth of its corruption, the 40 you've entered into begins by flushing out what you didn't even know was in the way: pride, idolatry, fear disguised as faith, false attachments, even good things when out of order must go. And that is the first sign. You start losing what you thought you needed. You feel exposed, like your spirit has been scraped raw. It's not random. God is removing the noise so He can reintroduce Himself as your only source. The cleansing season is not glamorous, it's hidden, it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself with miracles or fire from the sky. It whispers with hunger, with discomfort, with a strange knowing that what once worked no longer does. And if you've felt this, if the things you leaned on are slipping away, and your soul feels like it's walking through invisible rain, this is your sign. You're not lost. You're being purified. Because 40 isn't just about enduring. It's about emerging, and before God releases new oil, He always empties the old vessel. This is why the first days of your 40 feel like disorientation. It's heaven rearranging your inner world. And just like the flood didn't end in destruction, but in a promise, this cleansing will not leave you broken. It will leave you ready. Ready to carry something holy. Ready to walk in something weighty. But only if you let the water do its work. 40 is the number of exodus you prayed to be free. And one day, without warning, God answered, not with applause, but with silence. Not with open doors, but with unfamiliar terrain. The chains broke, yes, but so did your sense of direction. The people who once walked with you faded, the places you once belonged no longer fit, and suddenly everything you knew disappeared. This is the second sign you've entered the 40, the moment of Exodus. Because when God delivers you, He doesn't send you straight into destiny. He sends you into the in-between, that sacred tension between what was and what will be. And it feels nothing like freedom. It feels like disorientation, like being led by a cloud you can't control, following a God who says, "Trust me," but doesn't tell you where he's taking you. That's exactly what happened to Israel. They cried out under Pharaoh's rule. God sent plagues, split seas, broke systems, and then led them straight into a desert with no map. Why? Because leaving Egypt was never the hard part. Getting Egypt out of them, that was the battle. In the wilderness, God exposed what slavery had buried: fear, unbelief, rebellion, addiction to comfort. And he does the same with you. The moment you enter your 40th, the familiar dies. The false foundations shake. What used to feed your soul no longer satisfies. You wake up each day spiritually hungry, but emotionally exhausted, wondering if you've made a mistake. But hear this clearly: this is not failure. This is formation. The wilderness is not where you're forgotten, it's where you're remade. And that process can't be rushed, because the habits, thoughts, and voices that survived Egypt cannot enter your promise. They would poison it. So God walks with you through the long, barren places, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He gives you just enough daily manna, glimpses of fire, occasional water from a rock, not to spoil you, but to teach you how to follow without conditions. And yes, it will hurt. Yes, it will stretch you. You will be tempted to go back, to romanticize the very chains you once begged God to break. That's what trauma does. It distorts memory. But the wilderness is where your loyalty is tested. Not to a place, not to a plan, but to his presence. If you've been feeling like you've left everything behind but have nowhere to land, if you've been living in between voices, between clarity and confusion, between hunger and hope, this is your confirmation. You're in your exodus. You're walking through your 40. And this tension is not a detour, it's the exact route heaven ordained, because God isn't just leading you to promise. He's making sure you arrive as someone who can carry it. You're not lost, you're becoming. And no one walks into the promised land unchanged. 40 is the number of revelation. There comes a point in the 40 when the noise dies, the people have faded, the distractions have fallen away. You are no longer running, you are no longer striving, you're just there, still, suspended. And that stillness feels almost unnatural, like something is missing. But what if I told you this silence isn't empty? It's sacred. This is the third sign you've entered the 40, the season of revelation. Because after God leads you out of Egypt and into the wilderness, he doesn't speak immediately. He waits, he watches, he lets your soul detox from the chaos it once depended on. And then, when all the other voices grow quiet, he begins to speak. But not in thunder, not in fire, not in the dramatic ways you expected. No, revelation comes like a whisper that pierces deeper than any shout. That's what happened to Moses. He ascended the mountain alone, no crowd, no applause, just 40 days of cloud and fire and mystery. And there, in that isolated silence, God gave him something the world would carry for thousands of years. The 10 Commandments were not given in the middle of noise. They were birthed in divine silence. This is the paradox of the 40. Before revelation comes, God will strip you of everything that made you feel spiritually confident. Your routines won't work. Your usual prayers will feel dry. The heavens will seem closed, not because God has left, but because he's about to reveal himself in a way you've never known. This is where the wilderness shifts from testing to encounter. If you've felt like your faith has gone quiet, like you're praying into a void, like your spirit is waiting on something undefined, don't panic. You're being positioned to hear. And what you hear in the 40 is not information, it's transformation. Because revelation doesn't just tell you something new, it rewires who you are, it breaks paradigms, it shakes belief systems. It shows you the world, yourself, and God through an entirely different lens. And most of all, it prepares you for responsibility. Moses didn't just receive words on a tablet, he received blueprints for a nation, because when God speaks in the 40, he's not giving you inspiration, he's giving you assignment. But here's the mystery: if you run from the silence, you'll miss the whisper. If you fill the space too quickly, you'll never hear the sound beneath the stillness. This is why revelation can't be forced, it can only be received. So if you're in a season where everything is quiet, where heaven feels slow, where all you can do is sit and wait, don't move, don't rush, don't try to fill it, because this silence is not punishment, it's preparation. It means God is about to speak, and what he says next may change everything. 40 is the number of temptation. Right after the silence breaks, right after you finally hear God's voice, comes the most dangerous part of the 40, the testing of what you just received. This is the fourth sign, temptation. And it doesn't arrive looking like sin. It arrives looking like a shortcut, like something good, like something close to what God promised, but not quite. That's what happened to Jesus. Fresh out of a 40-day fast, full of the Spirit, he was immediately confronted, not by a crowd, not by his followers, but by the enemy himself. Satan didn't come at day 1, he came at day 40. Why? Because revelation without testing is just theory. It has to be proved in the fire. And the enemy doesn't attack what's weak, he attacks what's dangerous. When you've heard God's voice in the wilderness, when you've received instruction, identity, or vision, that's when the whispers begin. Did God really say that? Are you sure this is the right path? You could fix this yourself, you know. The wilderness becomes a courtroom. The word is on trial, and you become the witness. What will you testify to? Your hunger, your fear, your exhaustion, or the revelation God just gave you? That's what makes the temptation of the 40 so deceptive. It targets your deepest spiritual needs but offers fleshly solutions. It promises ease instead of obedience, results instead of refinement, position without process. And if you're not anchored, you will fall for a crown made of plastic instead of a calling forged in fire. The enemy is strategic. He doesn't tempt you with what you don't want. He tempts you with what you want too soon. He says, if you are the Son of God, because that's exactly what God just declared over Jesus. The attack always comes in the area of your most recent affirmation. If God called you chosen, the enemy will try to convince you you're forgotten. If God showed you your assignment, the enemy will offer a shortcut to get there without the cross. And if God stripped you clean in the first days of the 40, the enemy will come at the end, offering to clothe you again, but this time with lies. If you felt that lately, an odd temptation to go back to something you thought you buried, a strange pull to rush the process, an urge to take control when God told you to wait, you are not failing. You are being tested. The fire is not a punishment, it's the final proof. Because the 40 doesn't just shape you, it exposes you. And the temptation that visits in this hour isn't just trying to derail your destiny, it's trying to see if you truly believe the last thing God told you in the silence. The enemy doesn't fear what you've heard, he fears what you'll become if you believe it. 40 is the number of delay with purpose. There is a moment in the 40 when the fire passes, the voice fades, the enemy retreats, and yet nothing changes. No doors open, no breakthrough comes, no confirmation arrives. You stand in the same place, surrounded by silence, and wonder, was all of that for nothing? This is the fifth sign, delay with purpose. The most difficult phase of the 40 is not the storm at the start. It's the stillness that comes after you've obeyed, after you've surrendered, after you've endured. And yet, the promise remains out of reach. This is where many fall away, not because they failed, but because they mistook God's delay for his absence. Israel knew this delay well. After they escaped Egypt, passed through the sea, heard God's voice at Sinai, they were poised to enter the promised land. The spies went out, the people waited, and then fear took hold. Doubt began to speak louder than memory. They questioned the timing, they questioned the strategy, they questioned the God who brought them that far. And what should have taken days became 40 years. 1 year for each day they doubted, but even in their delay, God never left. He still led, he still fed, he still protected, because delay in the 40 is not the same as disqualification. It's the proving ground of patience, the crucible where your motives are burned clean, the place where obedience becomes more than performance, it becomes identity. In this place, you stop serving God to get somewhere and start serving him because there's nowhere else worth going. Delay teaches you how to walk without adrenaline, how to trust when nothing is moving, how to keep showing up when nothing applauds you. That's when God sees what Egypt could never teach you: endurance. So if your promises feel stalled, if the vision God gave you is hanging in midair, if you've prayed, fasted, obeyed, and still feel like you're waiting, don't give in to despair. You may be standing in the most strategic part of your 40th. Because delay has never been the enemy of destiny. Delay is the refiner of those who carry it. When God delays, he is not rejecting you, he's maturing you, protecting you, preparing others around you, shifting atmospheres behind the curtain. And when the time is right, the door will not creak open, it will swing with fire. But if you try to force it early, you'll walk into a season you weren't shaped to hold. That's why the delay is holy. It holds back the promise until the weight of it won't crush you. So if it feels like nothing is moving, don't run, stand still. Heaven is not late. You are being timed by eternity. 40 is the number of spiritual pregnancy. There is a silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, heavy, alive. It presses against your spirit like something waiting to break through. You can't explain it, but you feel it deep in your chest, in your bones, in the timing of things. This is the 6th sign you're in your 40. Spiritual pregnancy. And no, it doesn't look like movement. It looks like stillness, like delay, like confusion. But underneath, something is growing, hidden, sacred, ordained. The number 40 has always marked a womb in time. From conception to birth, a child forms in 40 weeks, and in Scripture, 40 is when God forms things too, not just in the earth, but in people. You may not see change in the mirror, but inside the pressure is real. You feel stretched, pulled, overwhelmed by emotions you can't name. Your sleep changes, your appetite shifts. You crave solitude. Not because you're broken, but because heaven is working inside of you. Something is being carried that cannot be born prematurely. This is what most people miss about the 40. It's not just a test. It's a pregnancy. The wilderness isn't just a place of wandering, it's a womb of purpose. And pain is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the sign that something holy is about to emerge. But like all pregnancy, there comes a point where the weight becomes unbearable. You feel out of sync with everything and everyone. You try to explain it, but no one gets it. You're not who you used to be, but you're not yet who you're becoming. This in-between space is sacred. It's where destiny takes shape in the dark, where God forms things not with your permission, but with your surrender. And just like Mary carried the word in her womb, you are carrying something prophetic, something that will not belong to you alone, but will impact others when it's born. But birth requires timing, And timing requires trust. You can't rush the 40th. You can't force a divine pregnancy to deliver early. If you do, it will come out underdeveloped, fragile, vulnerable to attack. That's why God lets the pressure build, not to break you, but to push you, to expand your capacity for what He's about to release. So if you've been feeling like something is stirring under the surface, if your soul aches for something beyond words, if life feels tight, swollen, and spiritually overdue, don't panic. You are not stuck. You are not lost. You are pregnant with something eternal. And when the moment comes, when the spiritual waters break, nothing will stop what's been appointed to be born. 40 is the number before assignment. There comes a moment, quiet, holy, unmistakable, when everything shifts. You feel it before it happens. A stillness in the atmosphere, a trembling in your spirit. The pressure doesn't crush you anymore, it clarifies you. The fog begins to lift, the silence becomes strategy, and suddenly, you just know it's time. This is the 7th sign you've reached the fullness of your 40, the moment before assignment. Because the 40 doesn't end in mystery, it ends in movement, and not just any movement, but anointed purpose. This is when the womb opens, when the preparation becomes prophecy, when the wilderness gives way to calling. Look at every 40 in Scripture and you'll see the same pattern. After 40 days of rain, Noah stepped out to rebuild a new world. After 40 years of wandering, Joshua rose to lead the next generation. After 40 days of confrontation, Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit and launched into destiny, because God never wastes the wilderness. He uses it to forge weapons, to sharpen voices, to set apart those He can trust. And if you've survived this long through cleansing, through exodus, through silence, temptation, delay, and travail, then hear this. You are no longer who you were when you started. You've been marked, refined, baptized by fire. And now heaven is watching to see what you will do with what you've become. The assignment waiting on the other side of your 40 is not about comfort. It's not about platform. It's about impact. It's about war. Because those who make it through the 40 are not ordinary believers. They are carriers of glory, disruptors of systems, voices crying in the wilderness. You weren't just healed, you were equipped. You weren't just delivered, you were deployed. And when God brings someone to the end of a 40, He doesn't ask if they're ready, He says, go. Because your readiness is not in your confidence, it's in your obedience. That's what makes this moment so terrifying and so holy. You're not being called to do something small, you're being entrusted with something eternal. The 40 ends when heaven releases you. But don't mistake release for ease. This is the beginning of battle. The mantle is weighty, the mission will cost you. And that's why the journey was so long. It wasn't about getting through the 40, it was about making sure the 40 got through you. And now that it has, you are ready. Not because you feel strong, but because you finally know you were born for this. You're not just seeing a number, you're hearing a call. You thought it was just a number, but now you know it was never about 40. It was about you. The cleansing, the silence, the delay, the fire. None of it was random. It was a divine countdown, a refining, a call. And if you've made it this far, then you're not just being tested, you're being trusted, because the 40 always ends with one thing, assignment. So ask yourself, what will you do with what you now carry? You've seen too much to go back. You've endured too much to stay still. You weren't just passing through the 40 was passing through you. And now, heaven is waiting for your answer. Comment below. I've passed through the 40. Subscribe to Sacred Light, Powerful Words, because your next step will not be ordinary.